Welcome to Unhiding, the management podcast hosted by SquirrelNorth. Tune in to learn about leadership, modern management, and using the Kanban method. Every episode is designed to provide you with pragmatic, proven, and actionable guidance. Hello, I'm Fernando Cuenca, your host for today's episode. Just as 2020 was about to end, SquirrelNorth partner Alexei Zheglov sat down with Andy Carmichael, the Kanban expert and author. Andy is based in the UK, where he keeps a very active career as a coach, trainer, and consultant. He has been a distinguished member of the Kanban community for many years, and you may recognize him as one of the co-authors of the Essential Kanban Condensed Guide, the one with this little tower on the front cover. Andy and Alexei met without a predefined agenda, essentially to catch up on their recent activities. I invite you then to join in this rare opportunity to be a fly on the wall, so to speak, to listen in so while two Kanban experts exchange their thoughts, their perspectives on various topics, and often push the boundaries of the Kanban body of knowledge. So let's dive in.
All right, Andy, so it's just us and we've got some time to chat about anything. Now, we do need to be aware of flies on the wall.
Well, it's really good to see you, Alexei. Obviously, we haven't spent a lot of time together this year, so an opportunity to chat and chew the cud and think about interesting topics is a good idea.
Yes, it's good to see you. I think the last time we talked was sometime over the summer to discuss a number of things. So, so I wonder, what have you been doing, and any new ideas?
So I've not been doing a lot of work during the lockdown. We've had lockdown here we're in one at the moment, and we had one in the spring, and so not a lot of work going on. Although I did some consulting earlier in the year and followed that up recently with a hospital trust. That was interesting. That it was quite interesting because they're starting with Kanban, so I gave them a training course, that sort of thing, and then got into what their process was. So I think I'm sure you probably find the same. It's interesting when people are learning Kanban what bits they get first, and what bits don't stick just because you've done it in the training course. And I think in this case, one of the big takeaways for me was the difference between how typically people think about business processes and what you're trying to get with a Kanban process. And a Kanban process, generally speaking, we're looking at a sort of a linear process with work items flowing left to right. And people don't immediately get this concept that actually, I don't want them going backwards. I don't want them bouncing backwards and forwards, going around in circles and all this kind of stuff. And that seems to have been actually quite an interesting thing to talk about, quite an advanced level as well, because why is it that we don't, we want to sing, a monotonic flow in one direction and a process that shows that visually, rather than what actually happens, which is this guy does a bit, passes on to this guy, he passes it back again, says, no, don't do that, and so on. We get these, if we try and draw that as a business process, it ends up as these complex processes with loops and reverse flows and all the rest of it. And I know you did some work good few years ago about knowledge discovery, and this concept of major activities. I've used that, and I use that with this client as well.
Andy, I really liked your presentation, and I think it demonstrates the power of the method, and it demonstrates the power of thinking about our creative, intellectual knowledge work, as we sometimes call them, processes, as processes of discovery of information, knowledge, of accumulating that information and knowledge. And if anything, I prefer to find a different word for linear, because the meaning a lot of people attach to the word linear is failing to be non-linear. And maybe a better word here would be progressive, as in we have some knowledge discovery activity set that is progressing. We've gone through one phase of it, and we've discovered this much information, and we'll created this much knowledge, and yet this much insight, and then we're moving into some new phase, and we're not stopping or going backward, because I mean we've learned a lot of things, and yet we're progressing and moving forward towards the goal. Which is, we've completed this customer request or feature and delivered it to the customer. So it's a process that just progresses forward by accumulating all this knowledge and letting the information arrive. And so it just doesn't need to. We don't need to reverse that progress.
I think. Well, I think one of the things I was trying to get over with this client is that I'm not asking you to change the process in terms of thinking about this as a progressive, one-directional flow. The process is what it is, and we will improve that over time. But it's the representation of it. If you draw, I mean, it's out of date now, but I use business process modeling language and as a way of drawing stuff in these complex processes. But if you draw it in that kind of notation or a flow chart or whatever you do, you get the loops, you get the conditional things, and if this happens and we do this, if the testing find a bug, it goes back again. I'm not asking them to change the process. I'm asking them to think about the process from a Kanban perspective, where the work items go in one direction. So it bounces between people, it bounces between departments in one column, where the activity is mainly development and the second column is mainly test. So one of the objections I get is, well, you can't take our process and do it in a progressive one-directional flow because it goes backwards and forwards. And I'm saying, well, no. What you need to think about your process in a different way. It's not that that process isn't going on. It is going on, bounces between people, but it's in one column where we're thinking about this, trying to get this work item to the state where it's ready for you to use the testing or whatever it is. At that point, it goes over the line, and another set of activities which may involve bouncing between people occurs.
Yeah.
And that's something that at least first time round, people don't get it, because they're thinking, okay, I've got the developers column, I've got the testers column, I've got the QA column, I've got the manager's sign-off column, and it bounces backwards and forwards. And so, yeah, it is possible to do it. That was definitely the first objection.
Yes, I like to think that when the work item is in one of those columns representing a major knowledge discovery activity, that there is some kind of organizational social network that goes to work to discover that knowledge. And it's a somewhat different social network in each major activity. So basically, when we move from a work item from one column to the next, we effectively switch to a different subnet of that social network. And how that social network in the company is actually set up, and there could be some people more popular, so to speak, or perhaps those are higher in demand specialists, experts in certain topics, maybe certain parts of knowledge that we're working with. So how that network is set up may affect the distribution of delays. And that basically creates a unique process signature. And so separating out those major activities so that we can understand what kind of delays occur in each is an important step to understanding the process that we are trying to improve.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the other thing is one thing is saying a quote. Well, first of all, first objection is oh, our process you can't show in that way because things go backwards. And I'm just saying, you've got the wrong columns. You know, you're thinking about your Kanban process as if it's a set of departments and it goes between departments and it goes backwards and forwards. Don't think of it like that. Think of it in terms of what happens to the knowledge accumulated in the work item, and has it got enough to say it's ready for the next major activity. Mm-hmm. And so, first of all, it is feasible to represent a process like that, and it's a simpler view. It's a set of progressive stages of the work item, not the worker, that happens. So the second thing, and this was sort of made my thinking go on as well, is why do we do this? What are the key reasons that we want to have it? We want to represent the process like that. So there were several. One, that I think was beneficial to this client to understand is that what very often is missing, and was missing in their analysis of what's going on, is at what stage do work items get stuck? Where do the delays occur, and why do they occur? Now, again, it's not to say it's impossible if you represent things as bouncing columns to add up time in that column and time in that column, but it's not the same thing of we get a lot of delays in the user testing or the user acceptance or whatever because the early stages weren't done correctly, or because people that are needed at that stage weren't available, and those kinds of things. So by actually having those stages well defined, you get much better data about where the delays are occurring and what to do about it. One other thing, so if you've thought of this one, but if items bounce backwards and forwards in columns, you must see it a lot with your clients as well. But the first board they draw is very often thinking about it, who's involved and how does it bounce in them. Mm-hmm. But if you allow items to go backwards and forwards as a normal thing, not an exception, the WIP limits don't work either, and you don't get a pull system at all. You have to push work back up to the previous one. So if you put any WIP limits on, they don't work properly. So
no, it usually
another key reason
that way, and I think it's somewhat of a maturity model kind of thing. So the behavior that you describe and what you have been able to coach at this healthcare client is a higher maturity behavior when people see processes as such knowledge creation and accumulation. Whereas if people see the process as kind of tossing the hot potato back and forth between different workstations, that is a lower maturity behavior, and compatible with that low maturity behavior will be lack of control of how much work we actually have in process, perhaps the traceability of the work, or that hot potato that is being tossed back and forth to, let's say, a customer request or requirement or outcome. So those are all kind of lower maturity traits. And so a coach, change agents, leaders' job would be to gradually move the team or the organization or specific individuals towards those higher maturity behaviors, and your healthcare example demonstrates that.
Yeah, well, it's a very, very common discussion, and I think I think it should be talked about more, just because people don't need to go through. It's straightforward to think about the world this way. It's like the Kanban lens generally. Kanban lens sort of allows you to look at stuff in a different way, and that's all it's doing. And then you think, oh yeah, that stage where code review is a classic one. Years ago with a client where they wanted a column for code review. You can't have a code review column and not have items going forwards and backwards. So eventually I persuaded them to do a swim lane in the column, and it moves up and down until it reaches the state, okay, now it's ready for testing. And that's a much better way of seeing it. And the other thing is to get much better data out of it. So yeah, well, that was all around what I've been doing this year, apart from not a lot. That's was a very interesting activity, and I actually got to draw a new type of diagram for me, which is the Kanban board columns with the complex business process, which other people have drawn, and actually showing these loops and backwards and forwards are happening within a column, and drawing it that way was, I thought, a good way to help people to see. Yeah, I'm not telling them to change the process, although, yeah, we do want to change this process in the end, but it's however complex that thing, we can show it as a progressive state. How about yourself? What's been on your mind this year?
So it's been a difficult year. So I work primarily with SquirrelNorth
for everyone,
folks, and we're just trying to run some consulting and training, doing everything virtually. So on the more kind of creative side, I've started writing a book, and I think it will be roughly twice the size of Essential Kanban condensed. I'm kind of thinking about that type of format. So the working title is Essential Enterprise Services Planning, and I've got about 10,000 words written already, which is not much, but I plan to restart this after the holidays. It's not yet in a coherent state where there is a clear chapter plan, and things are kind of logically connected. Although there is, I think, one pretty complete 4,000 word chapter out of those 10,000 words.
Excellent.
I get closer to that coherent state, and once it's equal to roughly what David and I produced in the first week of writing Fit for Purpose, I think I'm going to start sharing chunks of that book with various people so that we can start the review process while I work on the remainder of the manuscript, which will have a more logical structure by then. So that's another effort that's going on, and I think that book in a nutshell is all about risk in enterprises and how risky decisions are ultimately made by people, and how we cannot really predict the future or control it, but what we can do, one decision at a time, stack the odds in favor of those human risk takers in the enterprise, whether they work at the very top levels of leadership or where they work somewhere in the middle of the organization, and taking responsibility for things like planning it and executing projects, or working on product strategy, or selecting features for the roadmap, or creating some creating some governance policies for various services, or perhaps executing work within those services. So all of those activities involve numerous daily decisions, and by accumulation of those decisions,
I think we're living in the middle of fairly, I would say, incompetent risk management decisions on a global scale, and unfortunately, risk management has been for years a very misunderstood concept. The idea of drawing matrices and saying this is high risk and high impact, and it's very, very simplistic sort of approaches, which can be demonstrated more or less immediately, are going to not solve the problem in any way other than ignoring, what will happen is that unlikely, very dangerous risks are left unaddressed, and then they come back and they can cause global recession or whatever. And on the other hand, we pay attention to these sort of medium risk, medium stuff, which is not really the point. So it's a very timely topic to be getting into. I mean, I found when I read Douglas Hubbard, his second book, which was on risk management. Did you read that one? That's so enlightening. Yeah.
Yes, Hubbard has a fascinating idea. It just puts it very plainly. Yes, absolutely. So risk management is about failure of things, but risk management is itself a thing. And what if it fails? You can imagine how that can lead to cascading failures of various things that rely on risk management. Basically, the failing risk management will be the common failure mode for a whole bunch of other things. And that may include, public health and nuclear reactors and airplanes and a lot of other things. And of a smaller level of concern, perhaps the timeliness of our, data center to cloud migration project, but I'm just joking. Then he said, we all have to do something about fixing it, and maybe, yes, doing away with low, medium, high is, the good first step.
So anyway, it's great book. Anyone reading is looking for a book on risk management. But I think this, this year we've suffered from very poor risk management, and I think our political systems, which have also come under scrutiny this year, certainly in the States and the UK, to name two territories I'm interested in, the way in which the political system is set up is not idealized for risk management, because it's very difficult for politicians to actually address risks which are likely to cause major problems in 10, 20, 30 years time, and that's not very long in risk management terms. So unless we can we can find ways in which there's motivation within very short stays, and also for companies as well, that if they are forced by fiduciary responsibility and whatever to look at their own profit maximization in a very tight constraints, the wrong results occur for not only for the rest of the world, but for the company as well. So I think it's such an important topic. We should be teaching it in primary school onwards. And hopefully your book can help point people in the right direction in terms of enterprises.
Yes, and there is.
I look forward to seeing it.
Yes, there is some good and bad, and the thing is, the current pandemic has really pushed everybody to the limit, and it really exposed kind of how inadequate our feedback loops are in the society. That it takes us a certain amount of time to observe something, understand what it means, then adapt, then implement some policies, and put them in practice, and then see the outcomes. Oh, by the time we've gone through it, a lot of things happened in the course of the pandemic, and we're basically effects of such delayed feedback loops and just inability to act fast enough on certain emergencies pretty much throughout 2020. We can also see, for example, how already different jurisdictions, different countries tried different approaches, and nobody has done anywhere close to ideal. And there are some deficiencies everywhere. It's just a matter of what kind of deficiencies. Over here in the province of Ontario, where I live, and by the way, this is the Canadian specifics. Canada is a highly decentralized country. So a lot of fighting a pandemic is really done at the provincial level. Different provinces effectively having different strategies for dealing with it, and that's appropriate considering very different distribution of population, also size of population, also sizes of provinces, and distances between them. So there's a lot of appropriate geographic and demographical factors that speak in favor of decentralization. And this is how it's playing out. In our province, well, we've done better than the worst. We haven't done as good as the best. We've done all right. So early on, the big challenge for us was testing, just the sheer quantity of tests. So a lot of infections were going undetected until sick people showed up at emergency rooms and hospitals and needed urgent care. That's what was happening in the first wave. Now, by the second wave, the province increased testing capacity more than tenfold. So there's a lot of capacity. What they haven't done yet is really, making the tests fast enough. It still takes a couple of days. I actually inquired just in case yesterday, and they said, do not count on test result coming back the next day, but 2 days is more like it. Well, that happens because there's certain batching and queuing in the process that virtually precludes the 24-hour turnaround, which is actually a fitness threshold if you want to do effective contact tracing. So basically, our medical system is here in the province is set up well to do the volume of tests and provide the volume of diagnosis. But it's not very well set up to have a fast turnaround time to allow rapid contact tracing.
Yeah, and I think, it's a common thing, isn't it, that we find in Kanban systems that the lead time is the crucial aspect of fitness or purpose, a crucial aspect, but a really, really important one. And and the source of delays, the place where things are waiting, is really where we should look at. I mean, I've actually seen, and I think is on somebody's Twitter stream that I saw it, but some good news around, our hope for the future, which is the development of the vaccine and the release of the vaccine, the good aspect was that they're not cutting corners in terms of what they do to bring a vaccine through all the testing that is necessary and the validation, but they're just removing the delays. They're removing, there are quarterly meetings to discuss the next phase for the next thing. And, you look at why can't this be done, go to the next stage tomorrow, let's make it happen. And that seems to have been done in a lot of those vaccine developments, that they just basically put all those key aspects of work without delays in between, and then they can look at getting a vaccine from start to finish done in 18 months or something, which has never been done before. And it's fantastic, but it's crucial obviously that the quality is is at the same level. It should be better, as we know from Kanban systems. If you take all the delays out, you get better quality as well. So I think there's some good, flow and Kanban stories out of this pandemic to draw, and we'll probably be teaching with them for years.
Yeah, Andy, from my own familiarity with biotech processes from my consulting practice, so it's clearly consistent with my observations that it's entirely possible to produce high quality vaccines on the within lead times that we're looking at. In terms of Kanban language, basically vaccines like the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, they're effectively getting expedited class of service, which means anytime there is any kind of blockage, delay, dependency on a shared service, which could be, let's say, any kind of testing lab involved in the production of the vaccine, or it may be, let's say, availability of, let's say, staff to do monitoring for clinical trials. Any dependency on any specialist group like this is going to get the highest class of service. When you run it like this, basically various delays vanish from a process, and the lead time of one work item can be quite fast. And it may not be the fastest actually in the history of this industry. I imagine certain, they won't tell us about this because this is all proprietary information. It's quite possible that some drugs were produced even much faster than this vaccine when given appropriate class of service. However, not every drug in the development pipeline can get this class of service.
That's clear. Yeah, I don't suppose anyone did a cost of delay calculation. It's again an example of saying, no, we don't need to do the calculation. The whole world economy is grinding to a halt. I don't want to divide that cost by the size of this work, even though it's big. Yeah. Sometimes we don't need to do calculations to know the cost of delay is very high.
Which kind of is an interesting segue into a very complex topic of cost of delay, which it can be looked at from a variety of angles, and and even at any given angle, there's a number of variables involved. We have its cost of delay, right? So we're measuring one thing, we're measuring another, maybe we're multiplying and dividing some quantities here, and so it's an interesting subject. And so one way to look at it, so there's several dimensions, I think, is from the maturity lens, kind of going back to kind of comparison of lower and higher maturity behaviors to, let's say, visualizing the process. So what I'm noticing, there are some kind of low and high maturity behaviors with respect to cost of delay. And as we know, it's not very advisable for, let's say, a coach or a change agent to expect a high maturity behavior from, let's say, a low maturity organization. So, for example, if in terms of, let's say, Kanban maturity model, if we observe an organization at ML0 or ML1 in terms of maturity levels of the Kanban maturity model, those are basically individualistic and team-centric ways of working. There is effectively no concept of that which is being delayed. And it's kind of pointless to talk about cost of delay when there is no concept of that which is being delayed. There is no work item being delayed because there's no service defined in customer recognizable terms. We're just tracking tasks at the individual level or team level. We got our work organized, we've got some collaboration, and all of this is good, but we're not yet looking at that thing that is going to be delayed. Now that begins to emerge at higher maturity levels like ML2, customer driven. So there's some manager taking responsibility for a service. They're talking to customers. Okay, well, there are customer recognizable work items now. So, however, the biggest problem that we often see at ML2 is the delay. And delays are, the tail is up to there into extremistan. And that's the biggest factor in the cost of delay. Because if you've got extremistan amount of delay, it's a random variable with super high variability, then the first order of business is you basically have to start chopping the tail of it and ensuring your service against the worst outcomes, against the worst delays. And that's a pragmatic advice to managers at maturity level 2. Now, as they make some progress with that and they start managing the flow better, so we get to the ML3, which is fit for purpose level. And now we can actually begin to deal with cost of delay as a more or less financial category, because, well, we kind of, we can control the delays more. They aren't entirely random and with extreme variation books. So this is when it becomes a really interesting concept, cost of delay, that we can somehow assess and then apply in our decisions. So ML3 and ML4 seem to be kind of the sweet spot for cost of delay applications as I see it, whereas at ML2, it's mostly about removing some unreasonableness from the process.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of Kanban systems, because the low maturity Kanban systems are likely as well to be lower level in the organization in terms of how broadly you're looking at the scope of flow of work. I have to say I found cost of delay a useful phrase to discuss with managers, because lots of decisions sort of at a senior level in management in enterprises cause delays or can avoid delays, and they are very often taken unconsciously or by accountants looking at the end of the financial year or something like that. A typical one for me was travel ban at the end of the year. So this time of year, we're getting close to the financial reporting. If you can stop the guys in those days flying around the world, staying in 5-star hotels and eating big dinners, even for a month, there's enough of them and they're spending enough each that you can actually impact the bottom line of the company or the department or the profit center just by stopping them flying. And so that gets turned into, because we don't want to pick out one or two, there's just the high flyers. We have a blanket ban in the company to stop any travel. And the accountants who decide this get rewarded every year because they can show, look, if they just carried on spending on their travel and at the same rate, there would have been another 10% expenditure there. And as a result, we've got X millions extra profit from this thing. It was a success, isn't it? Because what is not put against that is what impact it has on what everybody's trying to do, the value people are trying to deliver. You're saying, well, you've lost all this value because you didn't actually allow projects to complete this month because they couldn't get together for meetings, they couldn't, you've actually stopped stuff working. And, say, yeah, but don't talk to me about benefits of this, it sort of is cost, bottom line, immediate impact on the final, on the balance sheet and the profit and loss. That's what I'm going to do. Now, just introducing that word cost of delay, even though we're talking about deferred benefits, means I can say X million saved on the travel ban, cost saved, cost imposed is not having the delivery of that project. And now I'm talking about the same thing. And so there's something good about it. Although, it's a trick of the tongue, because all we're talking about cost of delays is benefits deferred. I can put this cost, travel costs, against this cost, deferred benefits lost. And now we have a conversation around, there's that cost saved, but there's that cost caused. And we hopefully can make more logical decisions than just manipulating the end of year figures, which it's really not a good idea. So I think that's the sort of first thing, as I can get in a conversation at a reasonably high level in the company, and people sort of get it. Oh yeah, it's a cost, isn't it? If I actually stop this project delivering its work or delay that by a month. That has a high impact on the cost.
Andy, this story reminded me of one of the points Don Reinertson makes in Managing the Design Factory, which is his old book from the previous century. But I make worth viewing, which I've actually been doing recently. So one of the points there is that we can actually trade time for different characteristics of our products and services. So for example, we could take extra couple of months and build more features into our product. That would be, those features would be worth something. Maybe those are differentiator features and our product can sell for higher price or maybe gain greater market share. But we'd be 2 months late to the market, and there's cost in that as well, right? That's cost of delay. Or we could do something else. We could maybe get access to a group of specialists who can significantly increase, let's say, some non-functional characteristic of our product. And now our product is of higher quality, it sells for greater price, there's benefit, but those specialists and time we spent, getting their services isn't free either, right? So Don says, you run numbers, and the trade-off is here or there. Or another thing we could do, we could make our product less costly to operate or produce, and there's benefit for that in the future, but there is cost of delay. Or we could perhaps cut some of those corners, and our product would be maybe not as good, and maybe make less money, but we are 2 months faster to the market, and there is basically negative cost of delay to that. So, however, in order to make all of these trade-offs, we need at least some degree of control over time in process and some degree of understanding it, like grasping it. And what I see in a lot of organizations, this is a very weak grasp at best. KMM describes this as ML1 or ML2, right? It has those labels for that. It's a very weak grasp where time between the start and finish of pretty much any work item is a very random variable with wide variation and managers having very poor understanding of what causes that variation, which is, by the way, mostly their own policies, and which suggests they may be lacking some tactical and operational feedback loops.
Yeah, there's no doubt that. I think that this general thing, of bringing the maturity level up, is essential, because in many cases there's no point in running the numbers if you have complete uncertainty around the delivery side. And I would also say if there's complete uncertainty in terms of what the benefit of doing something is. And I think this is where Agile has scored, as an overall concept in the market over the last 2 decades or whatever, 3 decades even, that moving fast and delivering small things quicker has immediate benefits. And the reason for that is because you can't run the numbers beforehand. You produce a product and nobody buys it. lots of examples of spending enormous amounts of money to get the absolute definitive best. I've worked on some of these projects, the absolute best thing, which will completely replace everything in the market because it's got all the bells and all the whistles. Never sold a single copy. So in an uncertain, where the benefits are uncertain, we have to be very careful about doing, the type of analysis which I'm sure is in Don's book, and it's certainly in his course. He explains, look, you've got 4 things, and if you do them in parallel, they all take longer, and you can just demonstrate the cost of delay by doing them in parallel is got to be longer. If you pick the best one, or even a fairly good one, do that, deliver it, and so on, and then do the next one, then do the next one. But the trouble is the uncertainty of, is this a good project to do? And so this is where you're getting into it. In some cases, it makes best sense to do very small things, usually making the stuff smaller is the way to reduce cost of delay. Do lots of them, but do them in parallel, because then you can see what works. And it's back to your risk management aspect, is that you're hedging your bets against the direction the market will take, and you're not completely out of step with the market if your best idea turns out to be actually no good at all. So I think this is where simplistic maths doesn't really help, because we are we're comparing things which are so uncertain. Your point, if our production system is immature and we can't really predict when stuff will be delivered anyway, that's one key uncertainty. But on the benefit side, the uncertainties generally are even more, and we may pick what we think is the best one and focus on that, because then we'll have lower cost of delay, but actually it's not the thing ultimately the market likes. So I think it's all related to cost of delay, but my conclusion on it is that there's a lot of nonsense talked about it. There's a lot of formula which we know are complete nonsense. They don't even stand up to dimensional analysis, and ignore that stuff. But the actual concept of your delays cost, managers understand it instinctively when you show it to them, and it's a really, really important thing to begin to understand, and then get your head around the maths, which is not, well, I'm gonna have to say, for about a year it just drove me mad in terms of trying to bring the different ideas around cost of delay together. But generally speaking, personally, I've not found it useful to do lots of calculations. It's more about, do you understand the risk aspects? Cost of delay is another word for business benefit, but it's a more precise term, and so you actually can get better analysis from it.
So,
yeah, good.
Andy, the way I kind of see kind of a number of conflicting messages on the topic of cost of delay, and I have to make sense of it. And so the way I like to unpack it right now is basically this. So with cost of delay, we have so it's let's be very clear. This variable is measured in dollars or financial currency per unit of time, right? So, which means at some point there is a number, right? And we need to, or maybe it's a function, how that number changes over time, right? So how do we deal with that? So there is a number. There is perhaps uncertainty about the number. That's another factor, because we don't know in
Definitely.
sure. And then the number may change over time significantly. And so
Yes.
it means what is roughly the behavior of that function, right? So is it steady, or is it, has a predictable or unpredictable jump somewhere in the middle of the chart of that function? So, which basically brings us, oh, and by the way, all of these bits of information that I just listed may come into play at very different decision points in different parts of the process, or perhaps the governance around the process. And so the way I unpack it is basically this. If we know the commitment point of a Kanban system, then at that commitment point, the most important thing, and I think this is a great insight by David Anderson and several early practitioners of Kanban, is that basically the only thing that matters at that point is the shape of the function. And these functions come basically in a continuum of shapes, starting with the step function, which is like a regulatory requirement, do it by this deadline or else. And that produces extreme urgency or extreme sensitivity to schedule around a certain date. And the opposite extreme is basically constant rate, cost of delay that we often see in various IT automation projects for industries like insurance or shipping. And there is a whole bunch in between. I don't want to list them all, but if you are in a particular business, you recognize what shape market payoff has for you. So, but that's just one variable, and you do it at the commitment point. You recognize the shape, and you match it with the correct Kanban class of service. But there is another decision which is made, and I've seen companies make it at a very different point, and it has to do with magnitude. Basically, how high is this chart in some financial currency? And when product managers discard options upstream, that's when they use that variable. So they simply discard options with low payoffs, and they never make those options never make it to a replenishment meeting. So they basically they get filtered out before you have to be well before the commitment point of a Kanban system. So if you only observe the commitment point of a Kanban, you'll never see those. And when it comes to
that's certainly true if all work items are of comparable value or comparable size, that's true. Because the low ones, but I think in a sense the rules of thumb are helpful in terms of pick small items that have relatively high value. That's now whether you call that using cost of delay or some other mechanism, that is the that's what comes out of this analysis, that you want small items because you see what's happening sooner and you get the benefit sooner, and you want high relative value. So yeah, I think so. I mean, I just wanted to pick up something else you said, which is very difficult to measure these numbers or even estimate these numbers, and I think one of the reasons for that is because we can't measure them even after the fact, because cost of delay depends on two things. It's what's the benefit of what you did, and what's the benefit or if it comes at this point in time, which very difficult to measure what that benefit is at that point or some point later. You have to wait for some benefit to accrue, and so whatever your prediction was, you got one point in time there, and saying, yeah, from that we got this brilliant benefit or this disappointing benefit from delivering at that point. But cost of delay is the difference between that and the difference of delivering it on a different date, which you didn't deliver it at.
So it's basically,
and that
it's the difference.
It's the difference between a number which you can't measure till sometime later, and even then it's very difficult because okay, you got some benefit, but was it just from that item? And you're subtracting the number of that if you had delivered it at some different time.
So
which you didn't do.
So
you don't know what the benefit would have been at that point. So I said, well, Hubbard would probably disagree with me to say you can't measure the cost of delay because he says you can measure anything. But sure, and he does point out that estimating is the same as measuring. It's the same word really. So you can make an estimate of it. So you could say that's a measure, but it's getting a number that we could really use and we could rely. So you've got this is the cost of delay divided by duration or whatever of this is slightly different than this. The errors in estimation of those numbers is enormous in most circumstances.
Or
I think.
Sorry.
Go on.
So basically, it's difficult to measure even after the fact because we're really measuring the difference between something we did and let's assume we can actually measure that, but now we're comparing it to something to the benefit of something, potential benefit of something that we actually chose not to do, so it never happened. So we basically have to understand the ranges of uncertainty involved in assessing the magnitude, and basically not fool ourselves and accept that range will be wide enough. But basically, if that range is already wide enough, and we've got a number of viable options, and we discarded the rest of them, that's basically where the magnitude variable has played out. Now, when it comes to uncertainty of a very different kind, our payoffs may actually be uncertain in a good way. They may be potential unicorns, and we don't want to miss it just because, average payoff is 1 million, but, extreme payoff may be 1 billion, right? We don't want to, miss out on that just because, some fake $3 million number won in comparison with our average 1 million, which is another number. I think we've got a two-word answer for this in Kanban: capacity allocation. One wishing to make convex bets can allocate capacity to convex bets. And
there are many businesses. Sorry, I missed your last sentence. I don't know if that came out in the recording.
And I've seen people do that. They give themselves a small chance to win big. It doesn't cost them a lot of capacity. In the meantime, most of their capacity is spent on bread and butter, over which they have a greater degree of certainty in the planning process. And so the technique, the Kanban practice to accomplish this is capacity allocation.
That's good.
Andy,
there's many businesses. I mean, just a quick comment on the end of that is there are lots of businesses where you expect to fail most of the time, but your business exists because some of the time you win. And what I think those kinds of businesses cannot use the cost of delay argument that's saying we should only do one thing because the cost of delay will be lower if we do them as a sequence of, this is our best bet, so we'll do that till we finished it, then we'll do this till we've done it, and we'll do this. It's that kind of business where we must do multiple things in parallel. That's the only way we can stay in business, is because only 1% of them turn around to be the unicorns.
Andy, I think we can really unpack the practical applications of cost of delay like this. That there is a maturity model. There is a correlation with KMM, and at some levels, it's just simply not really applicable concept just yet. At another level, you primarily focus on avoiding extreme delays. And then eventually you get to applying the actual cost of delay, at which point understanding the delay cost function and how it is maybe linear, maybe non-linear, does it have an unusual jump somewhere? Grasping that is important, and it plays out at the commitment point and getting the right class of service with your Kanban system. But there are also other variables such as the magnitude, and that plays out in the upstream Kanban at the option discard. And then the uncertainty about the payoff, and this is where we may need convex bet exposure that's dealt with by capacity allocation. So if we unpack it like this, I think it becomes practical, because that just means different people making decisions at different points of a process can make good decisions about what to spend the available capacity on, and that's compatible with roughly their position in the organization and what scope of decision making these people have. So if you're responsible for allocating budgets for different parts of the organization, you're effectively allocating capacity. You can choose to chase some unicorns with some of that capacity. If you're a product manager assessing relative benefits and drawbacks, and cost of delay of different features, well, you know what to do. And finally, if you are a service delivery manager, or if you're involved with, let's say, the commitment point, then getting the right class of service against the right combination of business risks, including sensitivity to schedule, is something you can do well.
Sounds good. Sounds good. It's definitely an important topic, and one that I think we're just, the practice generally across the board is exploratory, and it's not the case that it's yet at the level where people can plug in numbers. I really don't believe that's the case. So more insight into what it's doing and why certain things work is where we should focus. And yeah, let's see this going on. People are making these decisions one way or another of what to focus on and how many things to focus on in parallel. And they may not know that they're using cost of delay to do that, whereas actually they are. It's in most cases, it's not worth quantifying it. COVID being one of them. A COVID vaccine, is it worth plugging this into a formula to tell you this is what you need to expedite? No, just do it.
No, it's a decision made by a different risk dimension, right? So, that also brings us to an interesting, perhaps risk-related topic. I've read and reread a very interesting book, The World Until Yesterday. It's by Jared Diamond. He describes the life of various tribes that live in harsh environments like the jungle of New Guinea or the Arctic or the African desert. And they basically live life that was very common for all of our ancestors about 10,000 years ago. It's basically life, primitive life in small communities, very close to the survival level. Some primitive agriculture, some hunting and gathering, and you just basically survive in the wild, in the small tribe. It's pretty brutal life. I mean, he describes it in all the detail. And there are some lessons we can actually learn from these people, lessons that we lost perhaps from our ancestors, but we can still learn by observing these tribes. And that's what his book is about. And what's interesting is that there's a lot of good risk management that happens with these tribes, because they have skin in the game, and if they don't do certain risk management things well enough, you know, that tribe won't survive. And so it has survived, perhaps in an evolutionary fashion, being fit with all its practices and traditions and tribal culture, being fit to survive in the environment, the habitat that they're in. So there's some evolutionary selection going on. And so, you know, things like not sleeping under dead trees, you know, because, you know, you don't want to take this tiny risk, you know, thousands of times in your life. You know, if you do, there's very high certainty you will be killed by a dead tree. There are certain practices such as planting certain roots or vegetables that are only consumed once in a 100-year flood. You know, when you know you cannot eat anything else, and you know it's inefficient land use, inefficient agriculture, but it is survival. And like when you read descriptions of life like this, you start wondering, what about our nation states and our industrialized economies? When we optimize something for yield or for production or whatever, aren't we externalizing some risk? And who is going to underwrite that risk? And if the answer to that is nobody, then, you know, what are we going to do to deal with consequences? And I think there's some deep lessons in risk management that we can learn from these trades.
Yes, and I think that you know, robust systems or anti-fragile systems generally have failure at the low level as understood. You know, so some villages get wiped out, some individuals die from the consequences, but overall you have survivability and you know, the survive and thrive through you know, evolved tactics like that. And it is true that when you know, that the human creature is, you know, it's not just about individuals. It's not just about the behavior of one part, you know, one person. The structures that we build, the villages, the cities, the organizations, the empires, and so on that evolved post that period. These are mechanisms, by and large, that have resulted in a very successful human race in terms of, you know, the biomass on the planet. You know, but in that process, you know, evolution of organizations and evolutions of those structures is building in very great dangers into the future of the planet, because we're now capacity. You know, so it's another, you know, deep and philosophical thing, but it sounds a very interesting book. I've read another. It's Jared. I've forgotten. Yeah, I'll look it up because I've read him before, and it's a very interesting guy. It must be in there somewhere.
Yes, Andy, continuing your thought, it may be possible to kind of simplify the arc of history basically like this. So there were some tribes a long time ago, and the fragile ones died out. And the resilient ones survived the 100-year floods, but not 1,000-year floods. So basically, the robust tribal traditions survived, and the ways to cling to the environment, right? And now some of those tribes got anti-fragile. So they survived, yes, but also in some favorable circumstances, they really thrived and produced, you know, powerful civilizations, and eventually became, you know, large prosperous states. And now fast forward to modern times, we basically have some very prosperous societies. But the thing is, these societies operate so far above the level of survival of subsistence, which means they could afford to build a whole lot of fragility in the way we operate for the sake of efficiencies. And that basically means we are running some really deep risk once again, which basically means we shouldn't get too proud of technological sophistication, of vanity metrics like GDP. Well, yes, it is comforting to have an extra zero to GDP per capita number, yes, but let's not get too proud of it because there's some fragility built into the way society operates, and we've got a major scare this year. And maybe there is something to be learned about, how to remove some fragility and inject robustness into the way our societies work.
Yeah, and I think to me the key to that stability and that robustness and anti-fragility is that you have multiple threads, a diverse ecosystem that when circumstances change, the successful one, which ones we view as being successful, change, and these are more suited in this case than this one. So that it's when you build monocultures, it's when you build economic systems, based on a certain view of what a corporation should do and how it should maximize its profits and so on, that you're building fragility in there. It's a system, which if the environment doesn't change, you can say, well, that's how you get the maximum wealth, is by each of these corporations maximizing their profit. System changes in some way, and then you may have actually all of them wiped out. That's the fragility that you have by getting a monoculture.
I just wanted to maybe include one more thing in the podcast.
Dusk has fallen.
Yeah. It's a bridge to the future discussions, and I think we're going to be talking about this more in our professional communities in the next year or few upcoming years. So here's a short summary of this book by Jeffrey Waste. The title is Scale, and the short summary is, in our professional communities, we need more intelligent conversations about the concept of scale. And this book will stimulate such.
Certainly agree with that.
So,
good.
Yeah. So the low maturity way to discuss scale is basically this. I implemented this methodology with this team of magnificent 7 ± 2. How do I scale this to my organization that has 500 such teams? We need to graduate from this to understanding like how certain organizational designs, apply, to organizations of different sizes in terms of number of people, number of specializations, number of services, amount of revenue, and so on and so forth. There is kind of a very interesting chart in this book where the author studies scale of corporations. And he basically draws a flow chart. Here's how a typical corporation operates. Well, that chart scales from a lemonade stand to Amazon. And because there's about a dozen concepts that appear on it, like capital and revenue, expenses, profit, and whatever that businesses have at very different ends of the scale. And then he studies, and it's just certain phenomena, they span orders of magnitude. And so that chart tells me we already do something right in Kanban. For example, your business process operates at a certain scale. You make commitment decisions involving customer recognizable items of a certain, size and nature. Oh, and both sides understand what they're talking about. Oh, and they can roughly assess the risks of what they're getting into with that commitment decision. Well, you just model that decision point in your Kanban system, and that's basically it. You do not come up with a prescriptive methodology how to, moderate a decision-making meeting dealing with chunks of work of, a certain size of budgets attached to that will likely run into a problem, when you have when the budgets for those work items is 10 times more or 10 times less. All right, so you don't basically upset the natural scalability with the scale dependent prescriptions. We don't do that in Kanban. We do smarter than that, right? So we exploit.
Yeah, well, I know I got into trouble early on when I joined the community, because I said one of the things that attracted me to the Kanban was that there is a degree to which you can describe it as scale free. I actually agree with everything you said, and the really important nature of talking about different scales and being very different. And I think the only reason that it is possible in some senses to talk about Kanban as being scale free is because the description is very light. So it's only if you've got a very light description and you aren't going into details about, how long meetings are or who attends or, what a particular work item is or means. If you talk about it in very general terms, like Essential Kanban Condensed and the principles and the Kanban lens and stuff like that, we're talking about very general concepts about start what you do now and improve it, focus on the customer. There are principles and very general practices that happen at a wide variety of scales, if not all scales. And so, but in a sense, by saying that, I'm also saying, as soon as you put any detail, as soon as you talk about specific practices, you're talking about a specific scale, and you can't, you can't take descriptions of stuff at a specific scale in a specific context and just say, well, okay, although they did that in a team of 5, we can do that in the same way in a team of 500. You can't. And so the principle is that you work it out in the context, and this is the principle of Kanban. So it's scalable because the descriptions of it are descriptions of general principles and general practices where you have to work out what they actually mean in the context of the scale. So I agree. And I think it's good that people are realizing and talking about Kanban as a scaling method, because we're talking about taking principles and very general practices and working out what they mean in a context, not saying, okay, here's the manual, this is what the dev team does, this is what whatever. It's not that. You work out in the principles. So sounds like another book I should read there, Alexei.
Yes. So I don't want to go into all details of this book. There's a lot of interesting tangents that we could go on exploring different parts of it and how it relates to Kanban or how it relates to various societal problems. But the main message is it will change how people in professional methodological communities talk about the subject of scale. And that's a good thing. It validates some of the things that we've done right in our method, but it also it will also stimulate some further innovation in it, I believe.
Yeah, good. It's definitely an important topic, and in some ways, it's doing things at small scale has never been the major problem. We need to be able to coach and to guide people running large enterprise and large business, and realizing the limits of scale there is also important, because you can only scale in a monotonic way, in this sort of monoculture type way, where you think, okay, cracked it, I know how to make a burger and I know how to sell it, and I can do that all over the world, and it has very similar success all over the world. You can only do it if there's a commonality, a context which makes sense to do the same thing again and again and again. And so people who've done it successfully realize actually there's a limit to how much, even when you're selling a burger, that you have to bring it into a context and work out how it works in a context. If you're doing something more difficult than making a burger, then this aspect of diverse communities, diverse solutions to complex problems, and allowing allowing coexistence of the most successful way of doing it with other less successful but interesting ways to do it, because it may turn out that in 10 years' time, that's where the future of the company comes from. It's why I really hate it when, this is a trivial example, but I really hate it when organizations say, no, you can't buy that tool because we've got a 6-month project going on to decide what tool we're going to use in this context. So you wait 6 months, and then the company comes back and says, yes, we've decided to buy this tool, which is completely inappropriate for what you're trying to do. They want to get the economy of scale of buying licenses for everybody in the company when not applicable, can't work. So very good. Alexei, I really enjoyed our discussions, and look forward to the next time.
All right. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to do this podcast.
Great. Well, it's been really good to be with you, and I hope everyone listening, if you got this far, yeah, thanks very much for listening, and we'll look forward to the next time. Thanks, yes, Alexei.
Thank you everyone for listening.
And this concludes this episode of Unhiding. We hope you found it insightful and that it left you curious for more. As always, we encourage you to keep in touch with us. You can contact us through our website at www.SquirrelNorth.com, as well as through various social media platforms like LinkedIn and Twitter. Bye for now.